Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Access Blockbusters Pod. We are on episode number 51. This is going to be the post-Thanksgiving episode. So guys, I hope you really just had a fantastic Thanksgiving holiday. Spent some time with people you really cared about and you love, family, friends, and if you had the chance to spend some time at the movies, there are a lot of great movies that came out this past 10 days or so. So yeah, it's been a great time. I had the chance to just relax a little bit more and enjoy some time with some people I really care about. And so I'm feeling good, feeling rejuvenated. But I also, wanted to put out an episode as always, and it's going to be a little bit more of a relaxed episode. Not to say that there aren't some interesting things here. I finally got to see Wicked, and we're going to talk about Wicked and review that movie. It was a fantastic experience, but we'll talk more about that towards the end of this episode. But also, just looking ahead mostly to December, because there wasn't a whole lot of news per se in terms of, the last week, castings and whatnot, but there were some interesting things that came out. And also just looking ahead to shows like Creature Commandos and Skeleton Crew as we gear up for December. It's going to be an exciting month there. So guys, if you are listening on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, give this video a like if you are on this platform, and let me know what you think about any of the topics. And if you are listening on Spotify, because we do have an audio-only Spotify platform, make sure to go onto Spotify and let me know, give the podcast a rating and let me know what you think about the audio-only format as well. It's there for you guys if you guys prefer to listen on a run or while you're out and about instead of having to pull up the YouTube video on a computer or something like that. So both formats there for you guys as well. And yeah, that's about it, guys. Subscribe and let's get into the topics for today. All right, guys, so because 2024 is coming to an end and because this is a holiday week, I thought I would take some time here just to talk about the end of 2024. We'll do a lot of 2025 preview in the coming weeks, but, just because there probably isn't a lot of news to talk about here and it's just a little bit of a slower week, like I said, I wanted to preview, I think, what is going to be a sneaky, surprising month in terms of movie and TV. As I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about in this week's episode, the post-Thanksgiving episode, I was trying to plan basically what the rest of the year looks like. And as I thought about it, the more I looked at the schedule, the more I realized there's a lot of stuff coming out. So what this segment is going to be previewing December 2025, December 2024. What is going to come out for the rest of the year? Because I think you'll be quite surprised to see just how much content is coming and how exciting a lot of it is. So I'm going to go through each of the projects that I am really excited for to a certain extent, and some projects are more just curiosity things, and some of them I may not even watch because I don't have a previous or existing relationship with the franchise, but I think that there are things to point out here that you guys might be excited about. So again, I haven't picked every single little thing, every single movie or TV show that's coming out in December, but I picked some of the major ones, even ones that I myself may not go out and watch. But I think just for the sake of the conversation of seeing, what December 2024 is going to look like here. So let's start it off here. December 3rd is already kicking off the month with an exciting show, at least in my opinion, an exciting show, and that is Star Wars Skeleton Crew. Now, I know I personally understand, and I feel it too a little bit, if there is some disappointment going on with the Star Wars franchise, especially in terms of their Disney Plus output, because, when was the last time that they really put out something great? You could argue Andor, you could argue Mandalorian Season 1. It's been a while, and I think that just the pessimism going on here with the Disney era of, Lucasfilm era of, I guess the sequel trilogy era, I should say, of Star Wars has, I think, been warranted just because there hasn't been any consistency. You might have, liked certain parts of it, and I've definitely liked a lot of what I've seen, but it's just not been consistent. But Skeleton Crew is hopefully going to be one of those gems that we find here, just like Andor was, just like the Mandalorian Season 1 was. And I think that is also really exciting because it's giving us something to hope for again in Star Wars. And I think that based on the trailers, I've been excited about it. We'll talk more about Skeleton Crew later on in the episode and just what I'm hoping for, what some of my expectations are. But I think that just because, John Watts, who did all the Spider-Man films in the MCU, is doing this, I have some faith in it that, it looks good. And I'm hoping that it'll be something where we can at least, come to an agreement on that. It's one of the better things that Disney Star Wars has done. So Skeleton Crew, December 3rd. And then December 5th is momentous because December 5th is the start of the DCU as we know it. December 5th is the start of the brand new rebooted DC universe. Creature Commandos comes out on Max. By the way, I should have specified Skeleton Crew comes out on Disney Plus, but Creature Commandos is a show as well, and it's coming out on Max on December 5th. It is an animated show in the style very much in the same vein of Suicide Squad. In fact, basically Suicide Squad, but animated with different characters, and it's going to kick off Chapter 1 of the DCU, which is called Gods and Monsters. And I think it's just exciting. I've had my own trepidations with Creature Commandos of what is this really going to be? Is this just going to be a repeat of Suicide Squad? And, am I the most excited about it? No, not really. But I think what is more exciting about it is the fact that it is going to be the start of a new DC universe. And I think that is something that cannot be underestimated. So December 5th, Creature Commandos. And then coming out on December 13th may, in fact, be the last installment of the Sony franchise, the Sony Spider-Man franchise. I'm being a little facetious, but also, I mean, just the way that this is trending, I don't have a lot of confidence that, they're going to continue on with the universe afterwards, but we have Kraven the Hunter coming to theaters on December 13th. And I think I put this here. I mean, I put this here because it's a Sony Spider-Man film, Spider-Man adjacent film, but also because I think that this one, and again, we've been tricked before, right? Venom 3 I thought looked pretty good. I thought even the Morbius trailers looked pretty good. And I think that the Kraven the Hunter trailers don't look terrible. They look fine. I have some hope here also because this film is being directed by JC Chandor. And I think, I think the filmography is a little stronger than other directors. I mean, again, I had a lot of faith in Venom: The Last Dance as well, and that didn't pan out either. So I'm still a little cautious, and I don't know what to make of this, honestly. But I want to go into Kraven the Hunter believing that it's going to be good. And so I'm going to watch it. I'm going to be curious to see what they do here because, again, it could spell the end of this Sony Spider-Man universe as we know it, or maybe it's good and then maybe, things come out of it that are good. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I'm more curious than anything else. Coming into theaters also on December 13th is The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim on December 13th. And that's interesting because it's going to be a Lord of the Rings film, but it's not going to be a live action one. The next live action one we've talked about on the channel is The Hunt for Gollum, but this is going to be an animated Lord of the Rings film in the style of anime. And I think that is also very interesting. Now, I don't know how much appeal this is going to have because it's crossing over two fan bases and franchises that are, or I guess genres that are, very beloved, anime and Lord of the Rings. But I think that combining the two, I'd be very curious to see what kind of audience turns out for this kind of movie, because it's also a very different period of time. It's not the main Hobbit timeline. It's not the main Lord of the Rings timeline. And so I'd be very curious to see, how many people come out and see an animated anime style Lord of the Rings film that's set way in the past. We'll see. But I'm very curious about this as well. I won't say I'm super excited at this point, but I am very curious about it. So there is that. Coming out the next week, we also have two films that are going to be very big. We have Sonic the Hedgehog 3 coming out on December 20th, and I haven't, personally seen the first two Sonic films, so I don't even know if I'm going to see the third Sonic film, but I know that the Sonic films have been pretty well received, and surprisingly so, just based on all the backlash that was going on during the first film, and obviously the ugly Sonic controversy and whatnot. So very curious to see how well Sonic 3 is going to do here, because again, it could make a lot of money. It could also just kind of be in the same vein as the earlier films, being in that sort of $400 million range. So we'll see. But in terms of quality, I think we can kind of expect the same things, just a very entertaining kind of film here as we move forward there. And then also on December 20th, another film, maybe excitement's the wrong word, but I think curiosity is also a little weak. I would say I'm mildly interested in Mufasa, The Lion King. And a lot of that excitement and interest comes from Barry Jenkins, who directed the Oscar-winning film, the, now infamous La La Land Moonlight mix-up Oscar film Moonlight. And so I'm also curious to see what drew him to that project, because I don't hate the live-action Lion King film that was directed by Jon Favreau. I don't understand what the point of it was. Unlike the Jungle Book, which I think really, the live-action Jungle Book, which really expanded the original, and the original was not nearly as beloved, let's be honest, as the original Lion King. So I'm just curious what the justification was, what the motivation was for, making this new Mufasa prequel film, and we'll see if it's any good. Also, Aaron Pierre is going to be starring in it, and he is obviously going to be our Jon Stewart in the DCU. So there is that. And then we got three more projects here. What If Season 3 is going to be coming out starting on December 22nd, and it's going to be coming out daily. So I think 8 episodes, so December 22nd to the 30th, something like that. And yeah, I mean, I've talked about this before on the channel. In fact, in the last episode, I believe, or 2 episodes ago, I'm not super excited for What If Season 3, but I'm hoping for a few good, solid episodes. And we've been teased in the past that there are going to be some implications for the multiverse saga in this season. I don't know. I mean, last episode we saw the world tree, and great. That's not really a tease to the multiverse saga. So if that's what they're implying, like at the very end we see God Loki sitting on his throne, fine. That's not really that important to me. I'm just more hoping for some really solid and entertaining episodes at the end of this season. And then we have on December 25th the Bob Dylan movie A Complete Unknown, and it's a movie that I personally was not that interested in until I've been hearing some buzz that Timothée Chalamet is actually getting some he's getting a lot of rave reviews coming out of this movie, as he almost always does for any of his films, that he, it might be entered into awards consideration, which is interesting because he also has Dune Part 2, which I think he could be entered into awards consideration for as well. And I think that, I'd be curious to see it. I don't know if I'm going to see it, but it's something that, if we keep an eye on in the Oscars race, that maybe this film comes up there as well. And I'm hoping if we're able to do Access Blockbusters pods through, every single week through the remainder of this year and then going into next year, that we'll be able to do a whole episode doing an Oscars prediction episode as well. So I hope that we can do that in the future. But A Complete Unknown coming December 25th, Christmas. And then finally, rounding out the year, a very exciting series, Squid Game Season 2 comes out on December 26th. I am a big fan of the first Squid Game Season 1. I thought it was quite good, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing why, why these characters re-enter the ring, so to speak, and why they're back in this Squid Game world. Obviously, there's the out-of-universe, explanation of, well, we wanted to make a season 2, so obviously we're going to do the games again because that's what people liked. I'm hoping there's a more robust explanation as to why they're back in the arena, but we'll have to see when Squid Game Season 2 comes out on December 26th. So, yeah, just to recap, December is a very packed month. I think that there's going to be so much to talk about. Not to mention, I just reviewed Gladiator 2, and then we got Wicked Part 1, and Moana 2 to talk about soon. So there is still a ton going on at the end of 2024. And then 2025 kicks off, and we got Severance Season 2, Captain America 4 comes out very soon, and Daredevil Born Again. So lots of really good stuff coming out, and I think that we're going to end the year very strong. But let me know in the comments down below, what is your most anticipated project from this list? I'd love to hear, and I'd love to hear what you're looking forward to in general at the end of 2024. Let me know in the comments down below. All right, guys, so after last week, we talked about how James Gunn was clarifying the DCU continuity and the DCU canon, and it looks like, based on his comments from earlier, that the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker are both basically going to be canon, I suppose, with the exceptions of maybe some legacy characters like Harley Quinn. But James Gunn has since confirmed while doing press for Creature Commandos that, yes, the death of Rick Flag Jr. Rick Flag Jr., played by Joel Kinnaman, is canon to the DCU because Rick Flag Sr. is going to be dealing with this. That's Frank Grillo's character, who's going to be showing up first in Creature Commandos. He's going to be dealing with it. He's going to be angry about it in Creature Commandos. And we talked about how James Gunn said that canonicity in the DCU, as it pertains to the DCEU, which is the old, Justice League Zack Snyder universe, is basically going to be everything that's mentioned in the DCU that is from the DCEU. It's getting confusing, I know, is going to be canon. So if they mention Rick Flag Jr., if they talk about, the events of Peacemaker Season 1, which obviously they will do because this is Peacemaker Season 2, characters like Judo Master and all the returning supporting characters like Economos and Harcourt and Adebayo are all going to come back. So it's interesting to see how James Gunn is handling canon. But that's not what this segment is about, because James Gunn is continuing his tour of, clarifying everything about the DCU, I guess, as the DCU kicks off, which is really exciting. And so he has actually clarified something else that's been interesting. So Alan Tudyk, right? Alan Tudyk, who I will forever love him as K2SO. I know he's done a ton of other amazing film roles, but I will forever love him as the voice of K2SO. But Alan Tudyk is voicing a couple characters in Creature Commandos. Now, it was first revealed, I believe, in the official cast announcement that they were going to, unveil the lineup for the Creature Commandos. That it was officially announced Alan Tudyk would be playing Dr. Phosphorus. And I'm just on the Wikipedia page because, to be honest, a lot of these Creature Commandos characters are not as familiar with me. But, the Wikipedia page says a member of the Creature Commandos who is permanently radioactive. So he's the character, I think, I could be wrong, but I think he's the character who is basically on fire, or it looks like he's on fire in the trailers, right? So that was Alan Tudyk. He was going to be playing Dr. Phosphorus. But then, recently, it was revealed that Alan Tudyk would also be voicing Clayface, who, for those of you who have seen the Harley Quinn / Kite Man animated DC shows, you'll know that he is actually the voice of Clayface there. Clayface, though, in that series is a bit of a goof. He's a thespian, but he's just a very silly character who is kind of full of himself and, is a very actory kind of persona. But it's revealed that while Tudyk is, yes, voicing Clayface again in Creature Commandos, it's a very different character. It's not like they're going to carry over that character from the Harley Quinn show into Creature Commandos. He's going to be more vicious. He's going to be more of a killer. And Tudyk talked about how he enjoyed, voicing a different side or a different version of Clayface, if you will, which is really interesting. But then it was just revealed that not only is Alan Tudyk voicing two characters, but he's voicing a third. He is going to be voicing a third character named Will Magnus, who I believe in the DC Comics is the leader of a group called the Metal Men. again, I know very little about these characters. My extent of DC and Marvel Comics knowledge is pretty basic, and so when you get to the James Gunn level deep cuts, it's not really there. I don't really know a whole lot about the things that James Gunn knows about because he knows all the deep cuts. But Alan Tudyk is voicing 3 characters, Dr. Phosphorus, Clayface, and Will Magnus. Now, if you remember, a while ago, I think this was actually in the very first announcement that James Gunn made about the DCU Chapter 1 slate, he said that it was their intention that the characters, or actors rather, who are voicing characters in animated form would be reprising their roles in live action. He said that it would be, the goal was that they were going to have this continuity between the video games, the movies, the shows, etc., etc. So somebody, I believe this was on Threads or could have been on Blue Sky or whatever. James Gunn is very active on social media, if you don't know. He answers a lot of questions. But somebody asked him basically, so I thought the intention was, they're going to carry over into live action. So does this mean Alan Tudyk is going to be playing all 3 characters? Does this mean he can do this because a lot of them are going to be CG? What's the deal here? And James Gunn gave a very interesting response here, and I'm going to read it out. I feel like I could be wrong. Maybe James Gunn did intentionally say this at the beginning, and I just was misreading it or was not understanding it as well. But I feel like he is kind of restating what he said originally, but again, it doesn't really matter. It's such a piece of minutia that, it doesn't really matter. But I'm going to read James Gunn's response. So James Gunn responded to this person and said, "As it was always stated, we plan on the actor playing the same role for, quote, primary castings, end quote. If it's a minor character in Creature Commandos, we didn't do live action far and wide searches like we did for more sizable characters like Cersei, Nina, etc. Nina Mazursky, he's referring to one of the main characters of Creature Commandos. So that's interesting, right? Because again, I feel like I remember him not clarifying that in the original announcements, but again, maybe he did, and it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. But the point is that we're getting some more clarification now of how this is going to work. Because again, I also was wondering, does that mean Alan Tudyk is just going to be playing every single monster character in the DCU live action? But it seems to me a couple things here. It seems like Will Magnus is not really going to be a main character in the DCU. Again, take that for what you will. Or maybe he is the main character. Maybe Dr. Phosphorus dies in the episode, the second episode, and then he's not a main character. So who knows, right? But it seems like out of these 3 characters, at least 2 of them are not going to be prominent characters because that means that, they weren't really as concerned with the voice castings. It remains to be seen which character James Gunn really wanted Alan Tudyk for, and then the other ones he was like, let's just have you voice him just for fun. They can always recast, right? Alan Tudyk could have voiced them for very minor roles, like Clayface can show up for 2 scenes, and then they're going to, recast Clayface in live action if he shows up in Brave and the Bold or whatever, right? But I think it's interesting because I think it means that 2 of these characters, and I'm presuming they're Clayface and Will Magnus because Dr. Phosphorus seems like one of the main characters of Creature Commandos, although again, knowing James Gunn, he could have killed off this character immediately. So who knows? Put him in all the marketing, just like he did with basically half the Suicide Squad team. Or I guess, the first Suicide Squad team, because there were 2 of them in that film, and then they all died in the first 10 minutes. Spoilers for that film. But he could just as easily be doing that, or it could be that, maybe Dr. Phosphorus is the one that he picked Alan Tudyk for, and then he's going to be playing Dr. Phosphorus moving forward. So we'll see. But I think that that's interesting because I guess James Gunn is his criteria is that if they looked for a specific role for a live action character, then that is the character that will be mapped onto animation and vice versa. But maybe when they're doing animation, they might just swap in different voices. And Alan Tudyk is very good at these voices. I'm sure that James Gunn was like, hey, you voiced Clayface before. Why don't you try it again here? Or something to that extent. So we will see how that goes. But guys, James Gunn is continuing to clarify the DCU. This is really exciting. Next episode, we will talk about the first episode of Creature Commandos, which is very exciting. So let me know what you thought about these comments in the comments down below. All right, so big preview week here, because like we've been talking about with the end of 2024, we have a lot of shows and movies coming out, and 2 of those shows are pretty big shows. And the first one we're going to talk about here is Skeleton Crew, the newest Star Wars show starring Jude Law and a lot of very cute looking kids that I really hope will be able to channel, that Stranger Things kind of energy and have that great chemistry. And we'll see, we'll see. But I'm cautiously optimistic. It's hard because I say I'm cautiously optimistic for almost every single Star Wars show, and then I end up being usually pretty disappointed by most of them. And so we'll see about this one, but that's what this segment is about. We're going to go over 3 hopes that I have for Star Wars Skeleton Crew and 3 predictions that I have for the show. And hopefully, as long as we get a really, just a solid Star Wars show, I'm not expecting the next, Rogue One. I'm not expecting the next Andor or the next, original trilogy level film. I'm hoping for something that's entertaining and that has some heart and that has some solid characters and story. And we'll go over some of my hopes for the hopes for the show, some specific hopes for the show, I should say, in just a second. So 3 hopes and 3 predictions, as I've been doing with films like Venom and with films like Joker 2. We'll be doing that with Star Wars Skeleton Crew, and then we'll be doing that also with Creature Commandos in just a second. So let's start out with my hopes. These are 3 things that I'm not going to say that are going to, ensure that this is going to be a good show in my eyes, but I think that if they do these 3 things, then I have a fairly strong belief that this is going to be one of the better Star Wars shows. So the first one is pretty simple, just a consistent story. And I think it kind of feels weird to say that because, have a consistent story, like have a good story. That seems like storytelling, that seems like movie making, show making 101, right? But I think the problem here is that the Star Wars shows have just not been consistent with their narrative storytelling at all. And I even think a show like The Acolyte, and we're not going to talk too much about The Acolyte here, but, I personally didn't hate the show too much, but what I think could have really saved it was just some streamlined storytelling that made sense, right? That had some good logic to it. I think Ahsoka also, good characters, fine characters, really good moments, like the Clone Wars, sequences and flashbacks, but the story just felt odd, and it felt condensed, and it felt stretched out at different times. It just didn't feel right. So having a good, story, having a consistent story, episodes 1 through, I don't know how many there are, 8 maybe, and just having a consistent narrative go all the way through, I think will go a long way to making the show a success here for Star Wars. And so there is that. The second hope that I have is that let's not make this too kiddie, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is let's have kids obviously are the main focus of the show, but let's not have the show be too much, Disney Channel or Cartoon Network. I shouldn't say Cartoon Network, they had some pretty interesting stuff there. I just mean, let's not make this a show that's primarily targeted towards 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds, right? Because I think that that's totally fine to have Star Wars appeal to a wide range, but I'm hoping that this is a show that is not just for kids, but it has kids in it, right? I think that, again, they've talked about this. I think that John Watts has been very intentional in doing something like this, where he's talked about the Goonies as an inspiration and Stranger Things as an inspiration. And I, personally, as a huge fan of Stranger Things, I think that is a great example of having kids in a show, but also having the show just be for everyone. It's a great show. So that's the second hope there. Third hope that I have is just going off of that, good characters and good chemistry. I've said this before in my trailer reactions, but I think that this is a show that is going to be carried. It's going to be made or be broken by the characters. I think that if the kids have good chemistry with one another, again, I go back to the Stranger Things example, Finn Wolfhard, Millie Bobby Brown, Noah Schnapp, Kate Matarazzo, and Caleb McLaughlin, they carry the first season especially. And I think that as long as the kids have good chemistry, as long as Jude Law is kind of that David Harbour Hopper kind of character, I think we're going to be in for a good time, no matter what. So those are my 3 hopes. I'm hoping that if those 3 things happen, then we will get a show that is fairly up there in terms of Star Wars. At least in the sequel trilogy era. Now, in terms of predictions, right, these are not things that I'm necessarily hoping for or wishing or wanting. These are just things that I think will happen. And you can go back on record. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, in the first episode of whether or not these things actually do happen here. But I feel pretty good about the fact that these things will happen, at least as of right now. The first thing is that we will see at least one Mandalorian universe character. I'm not saying this actually as something that I want to see. I don't necessarily think this is a good thing. I just think with the track record of Disney, because this is yet another series that takes place between episode 6 and episode 7, and I don't even know, are there still plans to do a big Mandalorian universe crossover, or is it just going to be Mandalorian and Grogu? Is that it? I don't know. But I think we will see at least one Mando era character in there. I don't know if it's Mando himself. I don't know if it's Luke Skywalker, for all I know. I just have a feeling that we're going to see something like that there. And going off of that, actually, my prediction is that we will see at least one animated character in there. And what I mean by that is one character that originated in either Star Wars Rebels or Star Wars The Clone Wars or something like that. And I don't actually know canonically, is Hondo still alive at this point? I think Hondo would be. Have we seen him in the trailers? I don't know that. If we have, and I'm totally just missing the mark there, then that's on me. But I also just, again, I think that this feels like a place where you can have a character from one of the cartoons show up here, and it would make sense, just like how it made sense that Saw Gerrera showed up in Rogue One and whatnot. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense there, in my opinion. And the second thing is actually something that I don't think we're going to get confirmation of for a long while. And I think this show will be renewed for season 2. Just like Ahsoka was, right? I don't think Ahsoka was the most solid Star Wars show. I think it was a little shaky at best, but I think that just based on the potential that the show has, I think that it is a show that could definitely, it has the potential to tell many more stories with these kids in this universe. And whether or not it's successful or not, obviously that's the biggest determining factor. But I think that this is a show that, at least if done well, will have the potential for a season 2, in my opinion. So those are my 3 predictions and 3 hopes for Star Wars Skeleton Crew. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. What do you guys hope for? What do you guys predict will happen in Skeleton Crew? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, and the other show that I wanted to preview here is obviously, I think, arguably a bigger one than anything that Star Wars is going to do for a while, including Skeleton Crew, even though I am excited for Skeleton Crew. But this is monumental. This is the start of the new DC universe. This is Man of Steel again, even though at that time we didn't even know Man of Steel was going to be the start of the DCEU. And so it's monumental. Creature Commandos, coming out on December 5th, is the start of something big. Whether or not Creature Commandos itself is, super important to the whole DCU storyline, or, has a ton of doesn't matter. It's just what it represents of being the start of the brand new DC universe. And for that, I am actually quite excited because, again, I know we haven't revisited the DCEU in a long time. Don't worry, I have episodes ready to go. I'm just, waiting for a time when it's a little bit slower. I thought there's still some stuff to talk about here in the Thanksgiving season, but during the Christmas season, I'll probably release a few of those episodes as we get back to the DCEU rewatch. But, I wasn't a huge fan, I'm going to be honest, of a lot of the projects in the DCEU, even though I knew that they had a lot of potential. But I just think that having something fresh, having something new, and having both Marvel and DC functioning at such a high level, and hopefully Marvel gets back to the level they were during the Infinity Saga, and hopefully DC gets to that level, that really consistently high level that they used to be at, or I guess not even the DCEU, but just the Batman universe level, or the Dark Knight universe level. I'm hoping that they can also get back to the level, or can get to the level that Marvel was at, when they were firing on all cylinders. But Creature Commandos represents the beginning of that, right? If Creature Commandos is really bad, I think it is what it is. But I think if Superman is really bad, and I don't think that is very likely, but I'm hoping that that's not the case. But if it is the case, then I think that we're going to be in some trouble. But hopefully we don't get to that point. So here are, just like I did with Skeleton Crew, 3 hopes and 3 predictions I have for Creature Commandos. So the first hope that I have for Creature Commandos, and this might be a more personal one, honestly, because I would imagine some people actually might think the opposite of what I'm about to say. But I've said this before when I was reacting to the trailers for Creature Commandos. I am hoping this is not going to be too similar to Suicide Squad, the concept at least of Suicide Squad. And I say this as somebody who really did quite enjoy James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. But I have said this over and over again. I am a little worried that Creature Commandos is James Gunn too much in his comfort zone. How many times, I'm not going to go through my whole spiel again, but just to quickly say, how many times have we seen James Gunn now at this point in the comic book movie space do the whole ragtag group of heroes that, they shouldn't belong together, but they do, and then they bond, and then some of them die, and then it's so sad. And Guardians of the Galaxy 1, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Guardians of the Galaxy 3. The Suicide Squad, Peacemaker. He's doing the same kind of thing over and over again, and he's already done the Suicide Squad, and now he's doing basically another Suicide Squad. I don't know. Guys, I don't know. Because this looks, from the trailers at least, it looks conceptually almost like an exact framework for the Suicide Squad, just with monsters. And I guess that's fine, but and because every time also I do end up enjoying the projects, like out of those projects that I listed, right? The Suicide Squad, Peacemaker, and all 3 Guardians films, I haven't disliked any of them. I like all of them to varying degrees. But I am just hoping, and I know that Superman is coming, so, maybe that's a chance for him to really break out of his quote-unquote comic book movie comfort zone. I'm just hoping that, Creature Commandos is something a little bit different conceptually than the Suicide Squad. So there is hope number 1. Hope number 2, I'd like to see some hints towards the DCU, and I think that we're going to get some hints towards the DCU, actually just by nature of Frank Grillo showing up as Rick Flag Sr. in he's showing up in Peacemaker Season 2, but he's also showing up in Creature Commandos, obviously, as the main character, and also he's showing up in Peacemaker Season 2. There are rumors he's showing up in Superman, so we'll get to what's his name? Rick Flag Sr. in just a little bit. But I think that, some hints I don't need to see Superman show up in animated form. I want to know kind of some hints of the direction maybe we're heading towards a little bit. Like, why is it important that we're focusing on monsters here? Because the chapter 1 title of the DCU is Gods and Monsters, so I'd like to kind of get a sense of what's going on here, if that makes sense. And then hope number 3 is let's make this transition from animation to live action seem plausible. Now, we're only going to see half of that equation, right? We're only going to see the animation, but James Gunn has said that actors who are voicing their characters in animation are going to transition to their roles in live action, vice versa. So it's going to be very continuous, right? The actors, it's going to be all part of one same continuity as much as possible is what James Gunn was saying. And the thing is, right, based on the trailers for Creature Commandos, it's very stylized. It's a lot of violence and whatnot. And there are characters in there that kind of look crazy, right? I mean, just, you can pull stuff off in animation that I don't think you can really pull off in live action as well. I'm not saying you can't, right? And I'm hoping that if Creature Commandos, gets a second life in live action, then I'm hoping that it's plausible that in 2026 or 2027 or whenever the Creature Commandos show up again, if they do show up in live action, that it's plausible. It's plausible enough that they can actually exist in the same universe as the Superman that we see in 2025. So those are my 3 hopes for Creature Commandos. Now, predictions-wise, let's go back to Rick Flag Sr. I think this is kind of a shot in the dark, but I kind of feel not terrible about this. I think Rick Flag Sr. might actually be a main antagonist going forward in the DCU. The only thing I have to base this off of is just the fact that he is showing up a lot in the early DCU. He's showing up in Creature Commandos. He's probably showing up in Superman for a little bit, and he's showing up in Peacemaker Season 2. He might, for all I know, he might show up in The Authority, so he might show up in Lanterns. I have a feeling that Rick Flag Sr. is going to be one of the main, maybe Earth-based villains of the DCU early on, and I think that that's going to be very interesting. I'd be very curious to see if Frank Grillo has a big role to play early on with DC in Chapter 1. So there is that. The second hope that I have for, or not hope, excuse me, this is I don't hope this is the case unless the story warrants it, but this is more of a prediction. I think that, I counted on Wikipedia, I don't know exactly who's a member of the Creature Commando squad or who's just kind of an auxiliary character, because it seems like some characters like Frankenstein are not part of Creature Commandos originally, or maybe not. So just like how Joker wasn't a part of the Suicide Squad in the first Suicide Squad, so we'll see. But let's just say that there are 10 members, just for the sake of it. I think there will be at least 7 quote-unquote main character deaths. It's a big number. It's a big number. I honestly thought about 5, but I think that James Gunn just being James Gunn, I think that at least 7 of them are gone by the end of the show. I might have way overshot that. Maybe all of them are alive by the end of the show. I don't believe that's going to happen, just knowing James Gunn and his sensibilities. But I think that I think that 7 of them are going to be gone. And the final prediction that I have for Creature Commandos is that the post-credit scene will preview Superman in some way. This is kind of a no-duh. I mean, it's a no-duh. But I think that Superman just coming up so soon, and because it's the big project, and it's obviously going to really kickstart the DCU here, I think that it's going to happen. I think that the post-credit scene, whether or not it's in live action or in animated form, we're gonna get some big hints to Superman here. I don't think that one's as groundbreaking or anything like that, but I think that it's something that I'm thinking is gonna happen. So guys, those are 3 predictions and 3 hopes for Creature Commandos. I'm really hoping it's a solid show. It's a show that we come to love and enjoy as much as we have for the other James Gunn projects. And I'd love to hear what you guys are hoping for and predicting for Creature Commandos in the comments down below. All right, guys, so we have another episode of Dune Prophecy to talk about, episode number 2, and this is going to be a full spoiler discussion. So if you guys have not seen episode 2 of Dune Prophecy, just make sure to come back later, save the segment for later, and come back and listen once you have, because we are going to be discussing Dune Prophecy episode 2 and all the spoiler details. So that's your final warning. I will say this about Dune Prophecy. As I said in the last episode, it is a show that is all about intrigue, right? It's all about, building up the characters, building up the storylines, all the different plots, all the different betrayals and things that are going on, all the intricacies that make up the show, and make it, maybe less of an action kind of a show, and even less so than Penguin, which, it's in itself didn't have a ton of action in it, but it's more about the intrigue, it's more about the characters. And I think episode 2 really hits that home, right? This is a show that if you're not invested in what's going on, if you're not invested in the characters, or you're not invested in the stakes, then it's gonna not really matter that much to you. And I think that that's totally fair. We'll talk about who this show might be for at the end of this segment. But I think, until then, let's just kind of go through the episode as I always do, kind of doing a play-by-play breakdown of, not breakdown, but, just sort of walking through the episode again. And then we'll talk about our thoughts at the very end, as we always do. So as we start out here, the introduction, I don't think I remember this introduction sequence from episode 1. It might have been a new thing in the second episode, and I really like it. I think it's very, I know HBO did both Game of Thrones and Dune Prophecy, but it's very kind of Game of Thrones, where you're going through all the graphics and you have this kind of creepy, ominous music, but it's kind of stirring, and I like this opening sequence. I don't know, it's evocative of that kind of Game of Thrones kind of vibe as well. And I know some people have been saying, not just in my comment section, but in other people's comment sections, of, oh, this is just basically ripping off Game of Thrones. Guys, you have to remember, and I don't blame you if you watched Game of Thrones first. Obviously you watched Game of Thrones before, you might have watched Game of Thrones before Dune Prophecy because Game of Thrones came out earlier. But if you're talking about just pure inspiration, Dune, right? Dune was one of the seminal science fiction pieces of literature. It is, it was written in the 1960s, I believe, and almost everything that came afterwards in the science fiction space, and I'm talking everything, including Star Wars and most definitely even parts of Game of Thrones, were based on Dune. Dune was first. So, I think it's totally fine to love both something like Game of Thrones and Dune and Dune Prophecy, but just to say that, Dune Prophecy is ripping off Game of Thrones, maybe fair in terms of the television, the writing and whatnot, but the storylines and the characters and all the houses and fighting and spice, it's all been there first. And so I just thought that was an interesting parallel to draw, especially given the way that the introduction, was coming out. But anyways, so then we get some space shots as we begin this episode, which I think, I have to say, I really like the space shots when they use them in the Dune franchise. I know that they don't use it that much, but I think that they're just, I don't know, they're really cool. They look really cool. That's my, profound commentary on these space shots. So, but anyways, what's so interesting about this show is that it's being, set up as a murder mystery, at least in this episode, in this particular episode, it's being self-contained as a murder mystery, but who did the murders. And in fact, that kind of gets explored later on when, Desmond Hart gets interrogated and he's like, nope, I totally did it. I'm the one who did it. And then it's less about who did it because, within the Bene Gesserit school, people are like, you wonder who did it. And we're investigating this body of Kasha and trying to figure out how the murders happened. I think that's going to be the bigger question that I have going, from the end of this episode is how was he able, how does Desmond have his powers? I think it's a big question that I have moving forward into the rest of the series. So I think that'll be something to keep an eye on as well. Also, this school for the Bene Gesserit, it reminds me, I'm not going to say based on or ripped off or inspiration or whatever. I'm just saying from my own experience of what I've seen, it reminds me very much of Star Wars, especially the prequel era Star Wars of Jedi. Valia telling Tula that emotions are clouding her judgment, and later on they say something else as well about. I'll get to it in my notes, but there are a lot of allusions to just kind of trying to let your thoughts control you and your emotions, and I think that that's kind of interesting. It reminded me a lot of the Jedi Order in the prequel trilogy. So now we're setting up this thing here with this student named Lila and putting her through something called the Agony. And again, just like in episode 1, just like with any other Dune story, there's a lot of exposition, there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of new terms, and it's just something that we just kind of have to get on board with. And if not, then, the series is not going to make a whole lot of sense. And so there is that. We head back to Seleucus Secundus and we head back to the palace, which I honestly think is where things were more interesting with Desmond Hart and with the boy Pruitt, and then obviously with Inez and Kieran Atreides, and there are a lot of really interesting things going on there. But also then, the Mother Superior, Emily Watson's character, also shows up there. So I think the palace is where a lot of interesting things are going on and going to happen as well. Although I'll be interested to see if Inez finally does show up to the Bene Gesserit school, and if that makes that storyline, feel a little bit more prescient. Although I suppose the Lila stuff that happens at the end makes the Bene Gesserit school a lot more interesting, given what happens there. But we will get to that at the end of this segment. So the Emperor's wife, as we move on into this next part of the episode, the Emperor's wife is being very cunning and very calculating, and it's her idea in the first place to use Desmond Hart to attack their enemies and to manipulate him, or not manipulate him. I think he knows exactly what he's doing, but in order to just use him in her eyes to be a killing machine, basically. And I think that that's really creepy. And also the fact that she's blaming the burns of, of the son, Pruitt, right, Ricchese, to his own father. She's blaming it on the thinking machines, which I think she knows very well that that's not the case. But still, I mean, this character is also someone to keep an eye on. I think in the first episode, she didn't really have a whole lot to do, but I think that moving forward, the Emperor's wife, I'm calling her the Emperor's wife because I'm just blanking on her name, but I think that she's going to be a character that's going to be very, 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 very interesting to follow moving forward. So then Desmond comes forward, and Desmond basically is trying to manipulate the Emperor by saying that he, that the Emperor was the one who wanted all of this to happen, and he was just following orders. Again, another part of this character that I think is super interesting. He is quickly becoming the most interesting character in this entire show, and I'm so curious to see more of his backstory and find out what happened on Arrakis and what's going on. I think that that'll probably be a whole episode, honestly, a whole flashback episode about what happened on Arrakis, and we will see there. Then, and my notes as well, this is the other Star Wars connection here, where the sisters, they take or at least they tell Lila, because I think after what happened to Lila at the end of this episode, there's a lot up in the air about what actually is true and what actually is not true. But at least they tell Lila that they take the sisters from birth, from their mothers. And so that's another kind of, it reminds me of, the Star Wars connection. So then we get some revelations about Lila, at least told from the perspective of Tula, that she is apparently the great-great-granddaughter of Rakella. And so, yeah, I mean, that's probably a shock to her if that was the first time she was realizing it. And that's why she has to go through the agony to then, convene and to talk with Rakella and talk about what is going on here. Because, it's called Dune prophecy, right? And the prophecy is about this whole reckoning that's going on here. And they just want to figure out what's going on. And they want to figure out what to do, I guess, how to solve it. And so that's why they want to talk to Rakella. Then we get some scenes with Constantine and Pruitt Ricchese's sister, I suppose. I'm not going to go into detail here. Like I've been saying, this is, this show in particular is not family friendly, but the Access Blockbusters pod is family friendly. So just to say that, yeah, not family friendly stuff going on here. But I think the interesting thing is that later on, then what happens is that Constantine, who lets slip that Desmond Hart is being held in the palace, is that information is then given to the Duke Ricchese, and that is sort of the impetus for then threatening him later on with Desmond Hart. So I think that is also just part of the political intrigue, part of the political intrigue. So then Valia is like, well, I need to take matters into my own hands, as she should, because obviously Kasha died and also Pruitt died. And I think what she's seeing here, what's so interesting about this character is that she's seeing her whole world kind of crumble around her because her plans are just not coming to fruition. Obviously, she had this whole idyllic plan of getting Inez to come to the Bene Gesserit school, and then Inez was going to rise to the top, and all of that is crumbling before her very eyes. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see what Valia does in retaliation and how she handles it. Because also, as she confronts Desmond later on in the episode, I think even then, as he resists the voice, it's another wrench thrown in her plans. We're going to see what this character is really, really made of. But she leaves Theodosia with Inez, which I'm assuming is going to be a key character pairing later on in the show. And I'm very interested to see the interaction between those two characters, because I do like the character of Inez, and I want to know more about Theodosia. So we'll see if those two characters have anything going on there. Then Mother Superior interrogates Desmond. It's a really fascinating scene. They're going back and forth, trading jabs. She's trying to tell if he's lying, and it's really the question, right? The question is, how was Desmond able to commit that murder halfway across the universe? And I think that will be a big question that will be answered later on. So then we move on to Kieran Atreides, who is apparently a part of this kind of rebellion. He has this whole layout of the palace and part of a rebellion that, because I guess this is sort of a social commentary on the fact that the rich get richer on spice, because spice is basically the currency of this universe, this Dune universe, and it's all on Arrakis, which is what makes Arrakis so important to these characters. But yeah, the rich are hoarding the spice, and so it's going to be kind of a violent rebellion. So it's very interesting to see an Atreides being a part of this rebellion against the Emperor, because history repeats itself 10,000 years later, albeit, but still, history is repeating itself in a certain way. And I think, honestly, it was at this point, once we got introduced to this Kieran Atreides part of the show, that I realized that episode 2 is dealing with a lot of spinning plates. You have this whole Kieran Atreides rebellion subplot. You have the Desmond Hart big I think I would call it the A plot of what he's up to and how he's able to commit these murders and what his motivations are. You also have this Lila thing that went on in this episode at least, and then you have Inez, and so a lot of spinning plates. I think personally, for me, it's working, but I can totally understand as well for somebody who is not invested in the show and for somebody who is not invested in the Dune universe that this it's just not working as well. Because I think that for me, this is a show where if you don't like the show because it's either boring or just confusing or too dense or whatever, that is honestly totally understandable, because it's just not a show that is conducive to being it's not something where you can just kind of turn your brain off. You kind of have to really lock in and figure out who these characters are and what their deal is. And I think that is just, it's part of watching a Dune show. It really evokes the experience, honestly, of reading a Dune book. These books are dense. They're confusing at times. There's names everywhere. There's terms everywhere. But if you kind of get to the root of the story, the intrigue and the political, not satire, the political intrigue, rather, is really interesting. And I think that this show is actually encapsulating that vibe very, very well. So there is that. The Mother Superior then has this conversation with another sister of the Bene Gesserit, and they're talking about, empowering the Emperor, but also empowering the rebellion. They're trying to play this whole cat and mouse game, but I think that the point of this show is trying to show that, plans are not always going to work out here. And I think that she's slowly starting to realize that all of her plans are really crumbling before her very eyes, like we talked about before. So then the Emperor's wife goes and meets Desmond, and she is playing a very dangerous game by trying to use him to kill other people. Don't know how long that's gonna last, but we will see about that. We then flip back to Lila, and at first I thought that this Lila subplot was honestly the least interesting one. I was like, I don't know about this whole let's talk to my ancestors kind of thing. But then a lot of really interesting things happen. So, she goes into these visions, right? And she sees all these women around her. And it's just creepy. It's so creepy because you see her surrounded by all these hooded figures, and it's like a horror scene basically. And she's getting this poison vision, and it's really creepy. So on top of the fact that it's important to the plot, it's also just really well shot and really creepily done. But then the story takes kind of a turn, because she sees the vision of the young Valia killing Dorothea, I guess. And is it revealed? I still have to figure this out because I haven't gotten a straight answer about this. Is it revealed that she's actually not the great-granddaughter of Raquella, and is she related to Dorothea somehow? Like, is there a reason that she saw that vision instead? I wonder about that, because I don't know that's not a scene that Raquella would have seen. That happened right after Raquella died. And so I'm actually very curious now, because Lila's dead, so we won't see that character again. But I'm actually very curious to see how that plays into everything that's going on. I think there's a lot more to Valia Harkonnen and the Harkonnen family that has yet to be revealed. I think that there were mentions that Tula made early on about all the secrets that they were keeping, and so I'd be very interested to see where that was going later. And then that ends a very trippy scene, and she dies, which is really scary. So yeah, and then we have one final confrontation here. I think this is a really great ending point for this episode, where Desmond confronts, Desmond confronts the Mother Superior and Valia Harkonnen, and she tries to use the voice, and she resists the voice, and Desmond reveals that his whole point, his purpose at least, is that he wants to wipe out all the Bene Gesserit, making him, clearly the antagonist of the show. That tracks, and now it just remains to be seen what is going to happen, and why is that his mission, and how is he able to do that? I think these are all intriguing questions. So guys, honestly, I've talked through this episode. I talked through episode 1. I get it, right? These episodes they're not groundbreaking television in the sense of I finish each episode and I go, that was just the best episode of television I've ever seen. That was groundbreaking storytelling. None of that, right? I think what these episodes are they're intricate, they're complex. Like I said, they mirror the experience of reading a Dune book very, very well. But I think that, if you're somebody who's like, I just don't care about these characters, I don't care about what's going on, honestly, I totally get it. This show, these episodes are just not for everybody. For me personally, as somebody who is a big sci-fi fantasy person, who's, a big fan of the Dune books, honestly, at least Dune 1 and Dune Messiah, and who just loves mythology and who loves lore, and then who also loves political intrigue, it takes a while. You're trying to latch on to characters, you're trying to figure out what's going on. But I have honestly found the first 2 episodes to be a very interesting build. They're I think the first two episodes so far are building towards a really interesting story, but whether or not it pays off, I think will then cloud my view of these first two episodes significantly. But I think that this show is still well made. I think the characters are interesting, and I think that the story that they're telling has a lot of potential. And so I'm excited to see where they go from there. But guys, let me know what you thought in the comments down below. But episode 2 of Dune Prophecy, did you like it better than episode 1? Let me know in the comments down below. Alright guys, I know I'm a little bit late to the party, but let's talk about Wicked. So this is going to be a non-spoiler / spoiler review for Wicked, and I guess it's officially Wicked Part 1, because Part 2 will be coming out next year. So if you have not seen Wicked Part 1, don't worry about that. We will be talking about the film in non-spoilery detail in the beginning parts of the segment, and then we'll be talking about spoilers later on. So I'll give a clear delineation when the spoilers will begin. But guys, I know, I'm a little bit late. I want to explain just briefly why I'm reviewing Wicked a week later than Gladiator 2, because I know they came out on the same day. Basically, I was going to watch Wicked or Gladiator first, and then I was going to watch the other one a week later, and it just came down to a decision based on the people that I was watching it with, and so we decided to watch Wicked together. It just seemed like a more, a better film to watch with the people that I was going to watch it with, and yeah, turned out it was great. It was awesome, and we'll get into that later, but I saw Gladiator 2 on my own a week earlier, and then I watched Wicked later on with some other people. And so that's why we're talking about Wicked in the post-Thanksgiving episode of Access Blockbusters Pod. But happy to be talking about it here, especially just because, Thanksgiving, there was not as much news to talk about. So really happy to be talking about Wicked here in this segment. So yeah, like I said, we're not going to be talking any spoilers. I'm just going to be talking basically what we saw in the trailers, and for those of you who saw the musical but haven't seen the movie yet, I really won't be going into details anyways, because you already know what happens in the story, and so I'll just be talking in more general details about my thoughts on certain things as they appeared in the film. So Wicked. I personally, just to, I always like to give some context as to where I'm coming from when I watch these films, and so I have not seen the musical Wicked. I was somewhat familiar in terms of just the general concept of the fact that there was the Wicked Witch, but they, the musical was basically attempting to humanize this character and make her more three-dimensional is basically all I knew about the musical. And then I saw the trailers and I thought, wow, this looks really good, I am personally a pretty big fan of movie musicals, actually, in particular. I've seen a couple live musicals, but in terms of movie musicals and specifically more the recent ones, because, I'm not a super big musical person. I don't know every single musical, and I don't know every single lyric to every single song, but you're talking about the recent ones, right? Like La La Land, Greatest Showman, a couple other, Dear Evan Hansen, Tick Tick Boom. These kinds of musicals have really been up my alley recently, and I've seen a couple of the classics as well. Les Miserables is amazing, and obviously the new West Side Story was really good. So movie musicals, of course, also including all the Disney ones as well, have been just they've been really something that I look forward to. I love what I say about movie musicals a lot is that when you have a movie, right, it's able to bring out these kinds of emotions and feelings and bring these characters to life in such a way that's beautiful, and it's so real to life in certain aspects. Even if you're watching cartoon characters, animated characters that are larger than life, in comic book movies, Star Wars, whatever, movies are able to bring out a lot in people that just can't be done in real life, and that's amazing. That's so awesome. And I think music actually does much the same. If you're listening to an orchestra concert, or if you're listening to a pop concert or whatever, music is able to bring a side out of you that I just don't think anything else really can. It's beautiful. It evokes happiness or sadness or joy or, anything in between is what music can do. And I've always said that putting those two together, so you can have a layer of even just the orchestral score, right? That's in almost every single movie. That in itself, that augments scenes, right? I'll give an example from a movie that I think a lot of my audience has watched, Avengers Endgame, right? Those final moments where you have the Avengers Assemble scene and whatnot, it's augmented by having those musical overtures of the first Avengers films, right? That scene doesn't work as well if you don't have the music. Similarly, I think musicals are able to tap into that, but on another level, because it's not just lyrical, or it's not just instrumental music, it's lyrical music, it's musical storytelling, and I think that that's so powerful. So I think musicals have the opportunity to always do something great because they have an advantage. They're taking both movies and both music and putting them together. So Wicked, I was pretty excited, to see it just based on the trailers and based on the concept. Cynthia Erivo is, her singing just in the trailers alone, fantastic. Ariana Grande, I don't know. I thought, because this is her first big acting role, I think. So I was like, yeah, we'll see about that. But there is no denying, no matter what you think about her music in itself, right? Just the pop music part of it, she is one of the best vocalists out there right now. And I'm not talking about, obviously she doesn't do opera or anything like that, but just pure talent in terms of vocals, she is up there with anybody right now. And I think that was a testament to her, to the fact that she was cast in this movie. I think they understood that, even if she wouldn't have been probably the strongest actress, although I'm sure they wanted to pick a very strong actress to play next to Cynthia Erivo. But her vocals, right? Her vocals is what's going to carry her. So I was just interested to see what she would bring to Galinda, the character. So I went into Wicked and I was floored. I loved it. Now, for those of you who weren't aware, because they have really been trying to shy away from this in the marketing, but it's, this is a review, right? So we're here to talk about the movie, and the movie is not just Wicked, it's Wicked Part 1. So for those of you expecting the entire story, if you've seen the Broadway play but you haven't seen the movie, this is only going to be Part 1, for those of you who are unaware. And I think that, there's always some trepidation, right, with a Part 1. Is it going to be a case where the movie just kind of abruptly stops and then you get into Part 2? You have to wait a whole year for Part 2, which I believe Part 2 is coming out almost exactly a year after Part 1. Is it the situation where it's just going to be like, well, that wasn't really a movie, right? That was just sort of half of a movie. I love Dune Part 1 for what it is. I don't necessarily think Dune Part 1 was the best execution of a Part 1. I think, and I know this is blasphemous for some people, it's fine, it's just my opinion. I think Across the Spider-Verse was honestly much the same. Really great for what it was, but I just didn't feel like it executed the whole Part 1 concept super well. I think Infinity War is still probably one of the best Part 1s, I've ever seen. And even that is it's not really a Part 1, it's a full story. But you can't really, Infinity War and Endgame are sort of a package deal, right? I think that's a brilliant case of that as well. I think Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 as well was a great example. And obviously they've repackaged that to the Final Reckoning since then. So Wicked Part 1 comes out. I've seen it. And I will say this is one of those instances where I go, they did a really good job of making sure that this was a complete film. And by complete film, I mean it's 2 hours and 40 minutes. It's a long movie. But at no point did I ever feel that length dragging on. I always felt like there was something engaging, and I think music has a big part to play in that because the music was always going, and it wasn't constant, right? This isn't a Les Mis case where the music is just going every single second. There are still obviously a lot of beats where the character's just talking and acting, and it's normal. It's a normal kind of movie, but the music is also, it's there, there's energy, but even in the scenes where there isn't music, there is still tension between characters, and there's a lot going on. I think, to go back to the actors, Cynthia Erivo, fantastic as Elphaba. She's great. She gives that kind of, I wouldn't say, what's the right word? It's not gravitas necessarily. I think presence is the right word. I think she has a great presence to have this idea of, this character who's coming into her own, but also very strong, right? A very strong character who is finding her identity and who she really is, throughout this movie. And I think that Cynthia Erivo does a great job. And we'll talk about the vocals later, but crushes the vocals. Now, Ariana Grande, like I said, biggest question mark in terms of acting, but I thought for the character that she was playing, she was phenomenal, honestly. I don't think Ariana Grande is, and maybe eventually, if this is where she wants to go in her career, great in terms of acting, but I don't think she can pull off something like a major drama piece where she is, having to carry the emotional brunt and weight of something like, a Marriage Story, for example, like a Scarlett Johansson's role in Marriage Story. I don't think she's quite there yet, but for the role that she was given, Galinda was a perfect character for her. It plays into Ariana Grande's strengths, I think, where she's just kind of the glitzy, trying to be pretty character who has it all, and then, is confronted with this character Elphaba who challenges her in that way. I think that she did great. I really think that she was fantastic in the role, and her singing, by the way, was unbelievable. I right from the beginning, from the first time that she starts singing, you're like, wow, because she has that pop voice, right? Like if you listen to her music, she has that very pop kind of those pop vocals. But in Wicked, it's not Ariana Grande singing Ariana Grande's voice, pop voice into Wicked. It's Ariana Grande channeling a true musical Broadway voice into these songs, and she's fantastic. I mean, her vocal range is unbelievable. It is insane. So those two characters, those two actresses are fantastic, and I think that in that way, that's, I wouldn't say 90%, but that's a vast majority of the battle going forward with this movie, because it is reliant on those two characters so heavily, and having those two actresses be such a strong part, right, play such a pivotal role in the film is it goes a long way into making this movie what it is. The supporting cast, and not to spoil anything, I'm sure you've seen the trailers, but I won't spoil anything, but just to say that there are some really fun other supporting characters in there as well who have pretty significant roles, and some have more minor roles, but they're also really fun. I also think one of the things that this movie does incredibly well is the costume design, the set design, the production design. I mean, I cannot imagine that this film will not at least get nominated for, those production design and set design Oscars. And then I wouldn't even be surprised if it wins a bunch of them as well. Because, I mean, the sets, Oz and Emerald City, and the school that they go to, it's all fantastic. And, just it makes the world feel so real, even though a lot of it is very stylized. It's not like it's not like Andor, for example, where it's the lived-in part of Star Wars. It feels very stylized, but in a way in which you feel so immersed in this version of Oz and of the Emerald City and of everything that's going on in there as well. I think in terms of also the story, there's a lot going on in here. And again, as someone who hasn't seen the musical and just knew the basic premise, I was surprised, honestly, at a lot of the commentary that was going on here. There's the basic commentary of trying to make a character like the Wicked Witch of the West more relatable and more sympathetic and more dimensional, having multifaceted characters, right? I think that that's the basic premise that I wasn't surprised that was what was going on. But there's a lot of commentary as well about, I think, just, not to go into too much detail for those of you who haven't seen it, but, about being different and about being marginalized and about, what to do in a society that really doesn't favor people who are in more unfortunate circumstances from birth and from things that happen to them, and sort of the guilt that comes with that. I think a lot of that is great, honestly. The movie is deep. It has those moments where you think about it, and I think that's really amazing, And speaking of amazing, I can't go further without talking about the musical numbers. I mean, because I'm somebody who listens to or who watches movie musicals and then immediately adds songs to a playlist that I have going for movie soundtracks, and I need to kind of marinate in it and digest and re-listen to the soundtrack and figure out what songs I want to add. But I mean, for those of you who have seen Wicked, for those of you who haven't, Defying Gravity is, I mean, it was probably one of the best 10 minutes of movie anything that I've seen this year. That whole section of Defying Gravity, it's incredible. For those of you who have seen the Broadway musical, you'll know why. I mean, probably because I'm sure it's just as powerful in the Broadway musical, but in this movie, Defying Gravity was just wow. I mean, wow. Every single thing about that sequence was just wow. And guys, I mean, I think that if you don't like musicals, I mean, this is probably not the movie for you, because it is very, very solidly a movie musical. It's not like Joker 2, for example, where quality, quote unquote, quality aside, it wasn't really a musical. It had musical numbers in it. This is a musical. So I don't know. I mean, if you're just opposed to movie musicals in general, I guess this isn't the movie for you. But in terms of, everyone else who is either on the fence about movie musicals or can tolerate that, to people who love movie musicals like myself, this is just fantastic. It's phenomenal. The story is strong. The characters are really strong. I mean, I think the characters themselves are the backbone of this movie, and having it go, in a direction where I'm so excited to see Wicked Part 2. I can't believe it's a whole year away. As soon as the movie ended, I was like, I need to see Part 2. I need to see Part 2. I can't believe it's a whole year away. Wicked Part 2 might have immediately jumped to one of my most anticipated movies of 2025 just by seeing Wicked Part 1. It's incredible. I'm so excited about Part 2. But the story is strong, the characters are strong, the music is amazing, the singing is out of this world, it's fantastic, and I just think that this is a story that, a lot of people can find themselves attached to, It's not just a story about, princesses and princes and witches and, magic. It's not just about that aspect of it. It's about a lot more. I think you'll find a lot of relatable aspects to it, a lot of commentary on the real world that I think is very poignant and very, very interesting. So Even if you're not someone who thinks they'll enjoy something like Wicked, I would totally recommend giving it a try. And now we're going to jump into the spoiler section. The spoiler section is going to be pretty short, just a couple little things I wanted to touch on here. But if you have not seen Wicked, I hope that this review is helpful for you. Make sure to come back to this video if you have seen Wicked, and then we'll jump into the spoiler section in just a couple seconds. So this is your final warning. Let's get into it. I think that that final 10 minutes, final 15 minutes of this movie were just, I don't know, it was just, I hesitate to say ever, but in 2024, at the very least, just the most powerful filmmaking I've seen in a long, long time, especially in 2024. I was shaking almost, at the end of this movie, just because of the Defying Gravity sequence and the way they shot it. And I mean, I haven't seen the musical, like I said many times in this segment already, but I can't imagine they could have pulled it off any better than they did. John M. Chu, and huge kudos, I should have mentioned it more in the non-spoiler review, but huge kudos to John M. Chu. His directing is fantastic, and I'm so excited to see what he does in part 2. But like I said, the ending with Defying Gravity was just so powerful, and Cynthia Erivo obviously killing it at the end as well. And I think, like I said, the commentary about, I think having characters that are outcasts, quote unquote, in society, or marginalized people, obviously the whole being green part as well, but being a character who is just seen at having such a disadvantage at the beginning of this film, and having people who are just looking down on her at all times, but then having characters who are trying to lift her up as well. Like, well, it seems like Michelle Yeoh's character at the beginning was trying to lift her up, but it seems like she has more nefarious purposes later on. But Glinda, I guess Glinda now, right? Glinda now, not Galinda now. Glinda is one of these characters who I'm sure will have a more complicated relationship with her in part 2. But the fact that the dynamic between these two characters is so interesting and so complex in a way that it's like, friends but not friends, but friends, but having their own interests but having each other's interests. And I think that that's so cool. Having characters like that, just having so much dimensionality to characters that in The Wizard of Oz, it's just the Good Witch and the Wicked Witch. And I think that that's so interesting as well. Jeff Goldblum is Jeff Goldblum, and he's awesome as the Wizard. I just think that, having Jeff Goldblum play a character that he basically is already in real life is fantastic. And that's what they did in this movie. That's what they did in Thor Ragnarok. And he is Ian Malcolm. So yeah, have Jeff Goldblum play characters more that are just basically Jeff Goldblum. That's great. I think that this is a movie where I'm, at the end of this movie, I felt so satisfied based on what we got. And even though this is a part 1, I was like, it feels like this was a completed story. And while I think that there are characters that we need to pick up on more in part 2, and I think in a vacuum, sure, if this was the only movie we ever got, I would have probably nitpicked at, well, Bach, we didn't really get a whole lot of Bach, and Elphaba's sister, we didn't get a whole lot of her either, and the Prince, I think the Prince, there's obviously more to him as well. And I think that there's more to explore, is what I will say. But at the end of the day, if this was the only thing we ever got from this universe, this Wicked universe, I would be happy, because it was great. There was a lot of emotion and a lot of heart in this character, or in this movie, and in these characters. And I think that's really, one of the best things you could ever say about a movie. So I really loved this movie, guys. I don't know, is it my favorite movie of the year? Maybe, but I'm just so happy that, a movie musical was able to connect in all the ways that a movie musical should, with the music, with the characters, with the story, with the visuals, with everything. Everything that you'd ever want from a movie musical is in this movie. So guys, have you seen Wicked Part 1, and what did you think about it? What did you think about the music, the characters, anything? Let me know in the comments down below. I just had a great time, and I can't wait to hear about what you guys thought in the comments down below. And guys, that will do it for the post-Thanksgiving episode of the Access Blockbusters Pod, episode number 51. December is going to be a whole lot of fun next week, guys. Next week, and probably throughout December and into January, it's going to be a busy month, because Creature Commandos, Dune Prophecy, and Skeleton Crew are all going to be going on for a little bit, and that's really exciting. So guys, look forward to more of that, and look forward to more reviews. Hopefully going to see some of those December movies that we talked about earlier on in the episode and review them here. And still haven't had a chance to check out Moana 2, but hoping to get to that maybe this week, and maybe we'll do a quick segment on that, as I know that it's going to be a little bit late. But hopefully you enjoyed this week's episode. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought about any of these topics. And thank you all so much again for listening. It's been just a great year. I'm really thankful to have this channel, to have this space to talk to you guys, and it's been amazing. So thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you guys in the next one.